Welcome friends to another Dune video. With the fall of the Padishah Emperor and the rise of Muad'Dib, what was the fate of the seat of Shaddams' empire, Kaitain, when the Fremen fall upon it? Friends, let's find out. Stilgar leads the Fremen forces onto Kaitain and marvelled at the sheer distances he saw between the stars whilst travelling there. He saw the amazing water amounts most planets had and the soft populations of those planets. He sips water, but not from thirst, and catches himself, and questions when he started taking it for granted. The Fremen on board the metal ships still tried to live like they did on Arrakis, considering the amenities the Highlander offered, luxuries to them. The sons of Jamis were with Stilgar, Orlop and Caliph. When it arrived and the guild vessel disgorged thousands of ships, the Fremen went down to the planet. There on the planet, the museums that were there for the butlers and for the old Crown Prince, Raphael, would mean nothing to the Fremen. On hearing of the Emperor's fall, some nobles had fled, and others had tried to fill the vacuum of power there, but the Fremen soldiers did not care if these nobles were on the planet, what their reasons were, or even if they declared themselves neutral. On the streets of the former capital, with the loss of the families, this once well-defended and fortified planet was anything but. The handful of Sardaukar there lacked cohesiveness with the Landsraad members, and the members themselves were too shocked to give the Fremen a real fight. Seeing the Fremen blooding their blades, Stilgar feels Muad'Dib will be pleased, though the few people that they did face were not good fighters. Not long after, Paul came to the planet, and the Fedaykin cheered as he descended the ramp, and he understood in that moment how tyrants throughout history would have felt, that they could do no wrong, that the power of a word from him could unleash so much devastation on a planet. And the capital that he came to hear was not as bad as he'd seen when studying as a child, watching information about it on film books. It was very different now. Towering buildings had been gutted by fire, monuments toppled, halls given over to governance, and private residences were ransacked. It reminded him of Rome, of barbarians sacking the Eternal City. Stilgar finds him and says the planet has fallen. The sons of Jamis find Paul, and they're filled with excitement and lead him away to see a miracle. As he moves through the city, he sees banners torn down and windows smashed. It had been a wild blood orgy here, unleashed by the Fremen. He knew his father would not approve of what happened. Paul defends his decisions internally by saying he has set a new paradigm where old rules do not apply. Further, he saw a wedding gift to Shaddam had been blown up, destruction for its own sake in that act, and in public 7 grotted men had been strung upside down. Most likely they were noble leaders. This would make peace harder for Paul to forge. Fremen ran to him with pennants from houses Ikaz, Riches and Tonkin. They did not know the deep history of these families, though Paul did. Muad'Dib saw the Fremen with baskets of booty and thinks not even Shaddam would want Kaitain in this condition. 4 warriors throw themselves into a fountain, one of the wonders the sons of Jamis had wanted to show Paul, and the sons and Paul himself gorge on the water and fresh fruit there. A second Highlander arrives with Irulan. Her sharp assessment of Kaitain is, this is a raped and pillaged corpse of what was once the grandest of cities. It will never be the same. At Paul's signal, Caliph and Orlop ran up the stairs, trailing his banner behind them. And Paul says he's not like any other force the Imperium has ever seen. Fire lit the Imperial Palace at his orders to bring down the great structure. He hoped the sacking here would be enough to get the other houses to submit. He hoped this signal and this path would be harder, but less than the worst one he saw in his prescience. Irulan says she'll never forgive Paul for what he does here. Paul says this palace was a symbol of the old regime. Like everything else about the decadent old Imperium, it must be swept aside. Kaitain is no longer the capital. Dune is our capital now. And in Arrakeen I command that a new palace be built, one to dwarf the grandest works of all the previous rulers. Whilst he was still on Arrakis, Paul considered his next move. There were about 10 million Fremen on Arrakis, and he knew with those numbers he would need to conquer many populations before the war ended. He did not hold enough fighters to just win this fight through military might. He hoped to prevail on most leaders of the Imperium with subtlety and intelligence, using sophisticated means of persuasion. His mother had already begun to make overtures for him. He had to demonstrate that surrender to an alliance with Muad'Dib was a smart decision, the best alternative, and so he summoned many nobles to Kaitain. Those who could come would be selected carefully, so it was he stepped out in an old Atreides uniform rather than his usual still suit. When he spoke, he used the skills taught by his mother and the authority he had inherited as the Duke of Caladan. He had acquired this skill also through his experience in the military, a certain command, a certain authority. He says the Crinos were defeated by their own arrogance and that he will lead with the principles of his father. One of the nobles says there is no stability. Paul says he can speak freely. Thorvald, the man who initially spoke, goes on to state that the damage the Fremen are doing is wrecking the Imperium. Paul says he holds all the power, so they should ally with him, and says if words are not enough, there are monetary incentives he can offer as well. Thorvald says the Crinos have ruled, or had ruled, for too long, and he has had his fill of emperors. Paul says the rest of them are rational after Thorvald leaves, and ends with, "You understand my terms." So now, friends, I turn things over to you. My analysis of Paul here is that he is saying a lot of things, but not doing them. His actions about disputing how his father would have done it, the rules that later would have followed. If you then look at his actions afterwards, they don't seem to match up. What do you think? Drop me a comment down below.